Welcome to China in Focus. I'm Tiffany Meyer. Our top story, China issuing a staggering 125% retaliation duty against the U.S. This after President Trump announced he would pause tariffs above the 10% baseline for everyone but China. Details on the latest escalation.
If China continues to retaliate, it's not good for China.
From oil to agricultural products, a look at which U.S. industries are poised to get hit by China's tariffs. Fallout from the trade war, Tesla has stopped accepting orders in China for two of its EV models. Both come from the U.S. At the same time, cargo containers originally headed to the U.S. are now piling up in a Shanghai port. And the man who heads the U.S. Indo-Pacific Command sends out a warning. The Chinese Communist Party's military threat is growing toward Taiwan and U.S. allies in the Pacific.
China's increasingly aggressive actions near Taiwan are not just exercises, they are rehearsals.
A high-stakes showdown over trade taking shape between the world's two largest superpowers. China is firing yet another round of salvo against the United States, ratcheting up duties on American imports to 125%. The move comes in response to President Trump's latest reciprocal tariffs on Chinese imports. NTD's Sam Wang has the details.
In an escalation between the world's two largest economies, China on Friday said it is raising tariffs on American goods to 125% starting April 12th. This after President Trump announced his suspending levies on many countries for now, but is hiking tariff rates on China alone. Chinese leader Xi Jinping responding for the first time, saying he's, quote, not afraid of U.S. pressure. The White House has so far imposed 145% duties on China, but the communist regime says it's not planning to escalate past the current rate of 125%.
If China continues to retaliate, it's not good for China. The president wants to do what's right for the American people. He wants to see fair trade practices around the globe, and that's his intention and his goal.
On Wednesday, a spokesperson for China's foreign ministry struck a defiant tone on X, posting a clip of former leader Mao Zedong railing against the U.S. in 1953. Ironically, that was just a few years before Mao led China into a famine that killed more than 40 million people.
Well, I'm not calling it a trade war, but I'm saying that China has escalated, and President Trump responded very courageously to that.
Friday's escalation marks China's second round of retaliatory tariffs against the U.S. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent says China has shown itself to be the bad actor through its actions.
This was driven by the president's strategy. He and I had a long talk on Sunday. You might even say that he goaded China into a bad position.
Over the years, U.S. officials have expressed concerns over China's unfair trade practices, from currency manipulation to intellectual property theft to dodging U.S. tariffs through third-party nations. Meanwhile, the communist regime is battling a sluggish economy at home, with record-low youth unemployment and a debt-laden real estate industry. Earlier this week, President Trump posted on Truth Social, quote, at some point, hopefully in the near future, China would realize that the days of ripping off the USA and other countries is no longer sustainable or acceptable. Sam Wang, NTD News, Washington, D.C.
Chinese leader Xi Jinping hosted Spain's prime minister in Beijing Friday, telling him that China and the European Union must join together to reject bullying actions. The comment a clear swipe at Trump's tariffs. So which industries in the U.S. are set to get hit by China's tariffs on the U.S.? China was America's third largest export destination in 2024. The top products the U.S. exports to China include electronics, oil, gas, and coal, agricultural products, including soybeans, plus aircraft, cars, and trucks. Now we turn to the car industry, where Tesla has stopped taking new orders for its Model S sedan and Model X SUV cars on the company's Chinese platform. This comes as the U.S. and China duke it out over trade, with the U.S. raising reciprocal tariffs on Chinese imports and Beijing retaliating. Currently, the U.S. tariff rate for China stands at 145%. China retaliated with 125% tariffs. Both Tesla's Model S and Model X are manufactured within the U.S. and are then shipped to China. On Friday, these models were no longer listed as available orders on Tesla's WeChat account in China. WeChat is the most popular social media platform in China and is often compared to Facebook. According to an analyst with the China Auto Dealers Association, China imported roughly 1,500 Model X and around 300 Model S cars back in 2024. With the ongoing trade tensions between the U.S. and China, Tesla may see a decline in cars imported into the Chinese market this year. Over in China, cargo containers originally headed to the U.S. are now piling up in Shanghai's port, China's top port for exporting goods to America. A staff member at the port told Chinese media that they are waiting for the owners to clean up their goods at the port. He added that container shipping companies have started canceling routes between the U.S. and China. A Chinese futures clearing brokerage firm estimates over 26 cargo trips between China and the U.S. have been canceled starting next week to early May, cutting shipping volume by 40%. As for responses from other countries, Canada's Prime Minister pledged to counter U.S. tariffs.
We are fighting unjustified U.S. tariffs, including those on steel and autos with counter tariffs of our own. And those are designed to cause maximum pain in the United States, but have only a minimal impact here in Canada.
Canada now faces 10 to 25% tariffs on exports to the U.S., though goods compliant with a trade deal called the USMCA can still enter the U.S. tariff-free, minus a few sector-specific tariffs Trump has imposed. President Trump has a message for Mexico. More sanctions and tariffs could be coming amid a dispute over water sharing. Posting on Truth Social, Trump wrote that Mexico owes Texas over 1 million acre-feet of water under a water treaty. He added that Mexico is violating its treaty obligation, and this is hurting South Texas farmers. Zooming in on China, will Beijing back down in the face of roaring U.S. pressure? If not, what cards do Beijing and Washington have left to play? NTD's Flora Hua taps 3 China analysts for insight.
Li Jun worked in mainland China's TV industry from 1994 to 2014. That's when he fled the country's communist rule. He's an award-winning director and a senior television producer.
The current Chinese Communist government resembles the Cultural Revolution era. Even under extreme pressure, mass starvation, or years of hardship, it refuses to back down. It relies on powerful propaganda, legal, and military systems to maintain control.
Another China analyst, Tang Jingyuan, has been a commentator for the Chinese language edition of NTD for years.
The Chinese Communist Party believes it has a unique advantage, what we might call a low human rights advantage.
That means the CCP is willing to subject the Chinese people to harsher circumstances and far greater suffering than it believes the U.S. will allow American citizens to endure.
The CCP sees ordinary people as expendable, like chives that can be cut down to the root, and doesn't care about their lives. In contrast, in the U.S., if citizens can't bear the pressure of inflation or economic hardship, they might take to the streets and force leaders like Trump to change policies.
Another reason Beijing might not back down is sluggish economy. Beijing's pandemic-era draconian lockdown measures severely damage its economy. Add to that a nationwide real estate crisis, huge debt, and tanking domestic consumption in recent years. Now, experts say the Chinese market's huge trade surplus with the U.S. and other countries has become its lifeline for survival.
What Trump wants isn't zero tariffs, but zero profit advantages for China. He wants to eliminate all the unfair advantages the CCP has in the U.S. market.
China's trade surplus to the U.S. roared from $83 billion in 2001 to over $200 billion a year. Since it joined the World Trade Organization, that number hit the highest point in 2018, when the trade surplus neared $420 billion. That's when Trump first decided to impose tariffs on Chinese goods. Despite that, the U.S. trade deficit with China remains high. Last year, it reached nearly $300 billion. So what can we expect if the U.S.-China trade war persists?
Realistically, with 100% tariffs, U.S.-China trade is essentially broken. No company can absorb a 100% tariff and still make a profit. I think this kind of trade decoupling only needs 90 days, 3 months, to cause serious damage. Why? Imagine you're an American business importing from China. If during those 3 months I can't do business with you, I have to find another supplier. Once these U.S. companies find alternative suppliers, the chance they'll return to doing business with China becomes very slim.
There's also another card that Washington hasn't yet played. Treasury Secretary Besson said he hasn't ruled out the possibility of delisting Chinese companies from U.S. stock exchanges.
These private Chinese companies are backed by powerful elites. If these companies get delisted by the U.S., those elites will go all out against Xi Jinping. The communist regime relies on these officials to enforce the suppression. If they start to feel they can't survive either, that becomes a very dangerous situation.
On the other hand, what tactics does Beijing still have up its sleeve?
There could be two possible outcomes. First, the Chinese Communist Party might shift all the blame for its economic failures onto the U.S. Its propaganda department will definitely do that. Second, it may try to divert public attention through war propaganda, or the threat of war.
Guo Jun is one of the founders of the Chinese edition of the Epoch Times.
Right now, China, as the manufacturer, producer, and seller, is in a very passive position. But if a hot war were to break out with the U.S., this excess production capacity could become an advantage. In times of war, the country with the strongest manufacturing capability could suddenly hold the upper hand.
Flora Hua, NTD News.
Coming up, the head of the U.S. Indo-Pacific Command is sending out a warning. The Chinese Communist Party's military threat to Taiwan and U.S. allies in the Pacific is growing.
China's increasingly aggressive actions near Taiwan are not just exercises, they are rehearsals.
According to NTD Taiwan, police on the island have launched an investigation into a series of bomb threats targeting performances in Taiwan by Shen, a U.S.-based classical Chinese dance company. Similar threats have been made against the arts group at venues across the United States. Who's behind it? And on Capitol Hill, lawmakers stress why it's important to highlight both past and present threats of communism.
Communism is not a relic of the past. It remains a present-day threat to freedom, human dignity, and global stability.
More on that after the break here on China in Focus. Welcome back to China in Focus. I'm Tiffany Meyer. The Chinese Communist Party's military threat to Taiwan and other U.S. allies in the Pacific is growing, and its expansion of power at sea is raising concerns. That's the message that top U.S. military commanders gave to members of Congress on Thursday. And today's Washington correspondent Jack Bradley has the details.
China's unprecedented aggression and military modernization poses a serious threat to the homeland, our allies, and our partners.
Top U.S. military officers testifying before the Senate Armed Services Committee on Thursday. Admiral Samuel Paparo says instances of Chinese military aggression against Taiwan has increased 300%. This aggression includes encroaching on Taiwanese waterways and conducting military drills near the island.
China's increasingly aggressive actions near Taiwan are not just exercises, they are rehearsals.
Many experts argue that a Chinese military attack on Taiwan could lead to mass deaths and a world economy in chaos.
Conflict in the Western Pacific over the Taiwan question would result in a 25% GDP contraction in Asia and a knock-on effect of 10 to 12% GDP reduction in the United States of America, with unemployment spiking 7 to 10 points above base, and likely 500,000 excess deaths of despair.
And China has been strengthening its ties with Russia since the outbreak of the Russia-Ukraine war, and China is watching closely for the outcome.
Russian failure and/or Russian success has the effect of deterring or emboldening the People's Republic of China.
That's as North Korea is building up its weapons arsenal while supplying Russian troops.
And over the past year and a half, DPRK has exported munitions and troops to support Russia, demonstrating the ability to provide external support while simultaneously advancing domestic capabilities.
Admiral Paparo says China's growing military capabilities were made possible by trade with the U.S.
In the last 20 years, they've increased their military 10 to 15-fold.
The panel says that senators agreed that there needs to be more funding for long-range munitions and improved ability to counter China's cyber and space systems. Reporting by Jack Bradley, NTD News.
According to NTD Taiwan, police on the island have launched an investigation into a series of bomb threats targeting performances in Taiwan by Shen, a U.S.-based classical Chinese dance company founded by Falun Gong practitioners. This comes as similar threats have been made against Shen at venues across the United States. To discuss it, we spoke to Levi Browdy, Executive Director of the Falun Dafa Information Center. The organization released information earlier this week about the suspects behind the bomb threats. What new details can you tell us?
Well, these bomb threats have been going on for more than a year. This is when they issue these threats, they usually use VPNs and other techniques to mask who they are. But for one of the first times, actually, we've been able to trace, or rather, the Taiwanese authorities were able to trace that back to its source in Shanxi province, likely at a building owned or run by Huawei.
Now, Huawei has been blacklisted in the U.S. for years. That's over espionage and national security concerns. It's a giant telecommunications company. Given Huawei's ties to the Chinese regime and the military, what does that tell you about this CCP operation targeting Shenyun?
Well, it confirms what we've suspected all along. If you look at leaked CCP documents, for years they've been talking about targeting Shenyun with quote-unquote precise strikes. There's been a slew of incidents perpetuated by the Chinese regime, its diplomats. And so the idea that these bomb threats and these other threats that are being hounding Shenyun all over the world are coming from a state-run entity or really a state-affiliated entity in Huawei is absolutely no surprise. This is what we'd suspected all along.
Now, Levi, you and I have spoken about transnational repression before in the U.S. How do these threats fit into that broader pattern here on American soil against Falun Gong and Shenyun especially?
The pattern's very disturbing and very specific, especially over the last year. I mean, again, since its inception in 2006, Shenyun's been a target of transnational repression of Chinese regime in over 40 countries around the world. However, this last year has been interesting in that at the highest levels of the Chinese regime, we know that they have recognized that they have failed to sabotage and stop this company. And so they started a brand new campaign, and that involves going after using our legal system, using our own governmental systems, using media, to try and trash or vilify the company. And right as this new campaign is really underway and occurring in the United States, these wave of bomb threats started happening and escalating. And so it dovetails with a global campaign by the Chinese regime to sabotage and really destroy Shenyun Performing Arts.
And on that note, given these findings, what does that mean for Americans and U.S. institutions? What is that broader concern here?
I mean, if you look at it, here we have a Chinese company that's clearly controlled by the CCP, making what would be in any other context be a terrorist threat. They're threatening to bomb a theater and kill innocent people. And here you have a Chinese company as the source doing that to an American company in Taiwan, in America, and in Europe. And so that is a mechanism, that is a will to do this kind of thing that I think is very dangerous, because they could threaten not just Shenyun, they could go after any organization, any person that they want to intimidate or silence anywhere around the world. And clearly they have the gall to do that.
And given all of those concerns, we do know there's been some congressional interest in supporting an FBI investigation on these anonymous threats. What other policy recommendations would you have here?
Well, I think two things. They should get a lot more strict on sanctions. They have the sanctionability. They've sanctioned individuals in China before who were involved in the persecution of Falun Gong. There's no reason they can't further go after individuals, government entities, corporations in this case, in the case of Huawei. And so I think they really should utilize the sanction mechanism that they already have at their disposal. I also think we should look at our FARA laws in terms of individuals, organizations that are clearly acting at the behest of Beijing, to silence an American company, to destroy American company, they should be clearly labeled as foreign agents, and certainly that applies to Huawei, but it would apply to a lot of the other proxies we've seen over the last 18 years that have targeted Shenyang in this manner.
Levi Browdy, as always, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
On the sidelines of the trade war between the U.S. and Communist China, U.S. lawmakers spoke on Thursday about why it's important to highlight both the past and present threats of communism as they continue to remember the millions of victims of authoritarian regimes. NTD correspondent Jason Blair reports.
Communism is not a relic of the past. It remains a present-day threat to freedom, human dignity, and global stability.
At the first event for the House Victims of Communism Caucus, Congresswoman Debbie Wasserman Schultz says that more than 1.5 billion people still live under communism.
The dangers of communism are not confined to history books. They are shaping world affairs today. They span from China's mass internment of Uyghurs and suppression of democracy in Hong Kong to Cuba's ongoing repression and North Korea's brutal dictatorship.
Rep. Wasserman Schultz says that these regimes actively undermine America's democracy, suppress free enterprise, and threaten national security.
The Chinese Communist Party steals our intellectual property, spies on Americans, and bullies our allies, all while spreading disinformation to weaken democracies, including our own.
Congressman Joe Wilson says that Russian President Vladimir Putin has set back the Russian Federation.
And sadly, war criminal Putin is trying to resurrect the Soviet Union. And we see that as he has rigged elections in Belarus, as he has rigged the elections in the Republic of Georgia, where indeed President Salome Zurabishvili was legally elected, but due to rigged elections, she was not able to take office because of war criminal Putin.
The bipartisan caucus was established in 2017. Rep. Joe Wilson says that its formation is important.
People need to know the history of communism, the loss, hundreds of millions of people killed and died, and hundreds of millions of people denied a fulfilling life. And it's done for power. And so the concentration of power in the ideology precludes the ability of people to have freedom themselves.
The House Select Committee on the Chinese Communist Party, or CCP, also focuses on the dangers posed by communism. However, its focus is exclusively on current threats posed by the CCP. The House Committee on the CCP's chairman, Rep. John Moolenaar, was just named U.S. Republican co-chair of the Inter-Parliamentary Alliance on China, or IPAC. The IPAC is a, quote, cross-party entity of legislators from democratic nations working to reform how countries approach relations with the Chinese Communist Party. Moolenaar succeeds Secretary of State Marco Rubio, who co-founded the organization. Reporting in Washington, D.C., Jason Blair, NTD News.
That's all for today's China in Focus. I'm Tiffany Meyer. If you have any feedback on the show or have something you'd like to see us cover, send us an email at chinainfocus@ntd.com. We'd love to hear from you. For on-the-clock original news coverage, visit us at ntd.com or download our NTD app. Thanks for watching. See you soon.